Hello there. Liz Truss is not hanging on to her premiership by a thread. She's doing a Wiley Coyote, having run off the edge of the cliff and is waiting for gravity to kick in. Now, firstly, I just want to point out that the US President Joe Biden has broken the unwritten diplomatic rules by having a pop at the Liz Truss government, saying he knew her tax plans would backfire on her. That's on top of ensuring we are kept aware of his Irish heritage at every opportunity. So I thought I'd throw this into the mix to remind you all of what a decidedly, strange person we are dealing with here.
Oh, look at Dan.
Now, the very important thing I told my daughter and granddaughters, no serious guys till you're 30.
Okay. No what?
No serious guys till you're 30.
I'll keep that in mind. At least.
Does that creep you out or what? Now today, both Richard and I will give you our separate takes on the state of UK politics. Anyway, we in the UK don't need US presidents to tell us how bad our governments are when they let us down. And right now, UK politics has officially entered clown world. Or is that just the entrance to WEF world? Either way, things are not going to get any better for the average UK citizen anytime soon. And I don't care if you're a Tory supporter, Truss supporter or Sunak supporter, the entire Tory party has let the country down. A Tory government that got elected to get Brexit done and to control immigration. It has failed abysmally on both those major points. All it's managed to do is continue the decline of the United Kingdom, further decreasing our energy security, further decreasing our food security, and further decreasing our border security. And now, after all the talk of a realisation for the need for increased expenditure on the armed forces in the face of Russian aggression, I bet the defence budget is in the Treasury crosshairs, because they would rather we went into defence union with the EU so we could pretend to be able to defend ourselves instead of working towards doing it properly and independently. And in the wings we have a Labour Party who would do exactly the same, but on steroids. The UK is in a doom loop, force-fed by its current political classes, all of them. And the whole thing is held aloft on a hideously complex Heath Robinson setup of house prices, dodgy financial instruments and the Bank of England. A stack of Jenga bricks about to come tumbling down at the first touch of a feather. And you know it's all a joke when the boss of Tesco's, John Allen, tells us that the only party with a plausible growth plan is Labour. The only growth that lot will accomplish is a faster growing national debt as they try to grow the size of the state and grow the number of people on the public payroll and call that growth, growth, growth. And that can only mean more tax and more spending. Can you really see Labour backing business to the hilt when their paymasters are the union barons? And once those union bosses are back in number 10 like in the 1970s, with their feet under the table dictating the agenda over tea and bickies with Keir Starmer, you can imagine the amount of business and money flight out of the UK, can't you? And you can kiss goodbye to any chance of border controls with that bunch in charge. And don't even get me started on election integrity. There'll be no such thing at any future election after Labour has opened it up to more Tower Hamlets type fraud. On top of that, Labour is looking to go carbon free on the UK electricity supply by 2030. That's 8 years away, in fact nearer 7. So when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, your wall sockets and light switches will be so much plastic waste. And every Labour vote is an anti-Brexit vote, be in no doubt. But then again, any Tory vote could, in future, amount to the same thing. And barely 3 years ago, Boris Johnson swept the Tories to an 80-seat majority. An 80-seat majority that now hangs around their necks like a dead albatross. It's useless to them, because they've comprehensively refused to use it to do what the people of this country wanted them to do with it. Mainly because, as far as I can see, half or more than half of those Tory MPs elected in 2019 do not want to deliver what the people of the country want. And those MPs, together with the pro-EU, pro-WEF agenda establishment, have turned that 80-seat majority into an irrelevance by splitting their party asunder. If that group of Tory MPs cannot govern for the good of the country with a stonking 80-seat majority, then what damned good are they? None. Zilch. Nada. And that's why the next election will see them pounded into the dust. And if you think Jeremy Hunt can steady that ship, the party is now engaged in a death spiral because of all the MPs circling each other like vultures, waiting for their chance to swoop and become leader. But they'll only end up feasting on the carrion that their party has become. And if you think the cries of "Bring back Boris" can get no louder, I reckon that within 1 year of a Labour administration, the whole country will be screeching it. Our politicians have collectively weaned much of the workforce off of the concept of working for a living and put them on the fast food of entitlement to free stuff at others' expense. That's why productivity is low and taxes are getting higher. And as entitlement grows and the cost of giveaways gets bigger, up goes the national debt. And we are increasing the number of the entitled by many thousand a week right now, with absolutely no end in sight. Someone has to pay, and that's always the taxpayer in the end. And no politician cares about offending the taxpayer. They just daren't offend the entitled. And the entitled includes many sitting in comfortable Whitehall offices or working from their plush homes. Right now the UK is headed for the rocks with the rudder lashed and no one at the helm. But the MPs manning the oars are still pulling as strongly as they can to reach that hull-ripping destination. And you and I are sat in the hold wondering what's going on. Apart from a few notable exceptions, I'm left with the feeling that the majority of MPs in the House of Commons don't actually like the UK. And that's without those in the SNP, Sinn Féin and Plaid. While many MPs in the Tory ranks appear to be more socialist than conservative, hence the policies we always end up with, and the inaction when tasked to do anything remotely conservative with a small c. In fact, the only political group having any real success at the moment are those eco-loons that travel at will around the country making everyone else's life a misery. Neither politicians nor the police can or will do anything about it for fear of offending a minority, but the majority can go hang once again. All I see is a group of career politicians working more against the country and its citizens than for them. That is where the big change is needed, not changing blue for red or red for blue, but changing who we, as voters, elect. The good news is that many people are now talking about just that. But the bad news for the centre-right is that they're saying, but not this time, we've got to stop Labour by voting for the Tories. And that's exactly why we're here right now. The doom loop continues. and I make no excuses for reiterating the point that the Tories cannot even do the job they were elected to do with an 80-seat majority, or more accurately, a 71-seat working majority. Useless. Anyway, I'll now hand you over to Richard for a few minutes while he gives you his take on where we need to be going, and you won't want to miss this.
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening. It's over. This act in the deep state political theatre play called the Tory Party has ended. The next chapter of distraction and false hope is being written right now as the Labour Party readies itself for power. In the last act, the dastardly Tories failed and were exposed for who they are, with the audience that is the British public baying for Tory blood and ready to usher in Keir Starmer and his party of unstable, woke, red flag wavers. Contrary to their claims, the Tories are not a party that represents small businesses, but a party that lives in fear of vested interests of its donors, the markets, big money, multinational corporations, etc., etc., at the expense, of course, of SMEs and ordinary people. And now they ready themselves to slam the final nail into the coffin of small businesses in the UK by raising taxes, apparently to plug the hole that they dug, by telling people they must stay at home. And before somebody in the comment section says, yes, but Labour would have done the same, yes, I know. But that's very much the point of this video. I mean, what is the real ideological difference between Labour and the Tories? Both bow down to the big state and the deep state, and do all that it takes to sustain it. There are only variances in policy between the Tories and Labour, and both are geared to sustain the big state. For there to be any change, the political tribalism that has dogged politics for generations must end. And I don't care if your grandfather on his deathbed made you promise to only ever vote for the same political party that he did.
If you don't vote Labour, I will come and haunt you for the rest of your days. I can tell you that for nothing.
We have a system designed to maintain a two-party state via the first-past-the-post system, with an extension to the illusion of choice coming from the Lib Dems, designed to keep the nice little sheep quiet and peaceful in their pens. So when poised against the political theatrics of the deep state and the elite, it seems futile to the voters to vote for anyone other than the big two. That is within the first-past-the-post political framework. This is where we need an alternative to the current political theatrics, and that can only be achieved with an electable political party that has broad appeal across what we call today the political spectrum. This party must believe in proportional representation and isn't filled with individuals who are loose cannons. Indeed, PR is spoken of within parties like Reform, and all power to them, but my fear is this. Reform may be powerful enough to take down the Tories, but are they broad enough in appeal to take down Labour in a general election? Well, I think even the most hardened Tory voters, in a choice between the now defunct Tory party and the Reform party, well, in a choice between those two, I think Reform will come out on top. So as the Tory party continues to disintegrate, Reform will soak up those Tory voters. Traditionally, at such junctures, those that identify as right-wing would immediately swing back into line and vote Tory, regardless of anything, just to keep Labour out. But the Tories have stuffed it so succinctly that such a swing back won't be happening this time, provided that Reform makes itself attractive enough to Tory voters, whilst attempting to attract traditional Labour voters. A tall order indeed. So what about taking on Labour? Can Reform do it? Well, of course they can, but they need to be very clever and cutting and merciless in exposing the nightmare that would be another Labour government, whilst at the same time exposing the nightmare that would be another Tory government. In other words, they must sell themselves as neither left nor right-wing and remove the enslavement that is polemically positioning itself on the political spectrum. And you know what? Richard Tice does seem like a decent enough chap, But does he have the level of appeal required outside of traditional right-wing politics to win a general election by reaching out to traditional Labour voters? For example, let's not forget the Red Wall voters went against their very grain and voted Tory and got burnt. So how easily do you think they would vote for another political party that is currently viewed as being right-wing? For reform to win, they must be merciless and as cunning as a fox. Oh, and speaking of foxes, Lawrence Fox and his party coming together with Reform and the remnants of UKIP and all other small parties who are ideologically aligned is imperative. If Reform can amalgamate with these smaller parties and take and only take the most sensible from the stock, a rebranded Reform Party could win an election. Oh, and GB News would need to be fully behind this, but it might have difficulty there with Ofcom when it comes to impartiality. I will end my segment here by saying Britain needs political and monetary reform. Without both, there will be no change. Anyway, back over to Jeff, and I will see you here again tomorrow night at 6 p.m.
Thank you for that, Richard. And finally, when subscribing, please don't forget to press the little bell and also select the all option, or you won't get any notifications when I publish a new video. And thank you all so much for taking the time to watch the show.